Thanks for joining me for a Kick Up the Arts. I am Nicola Meehan, and this episode, recorded live, is dedicated to one of Scotland's most brilliant, singular and quietly radical voices. 100 years ago today, Agnes Owens was born, and it was such a joy to be part of our centenary celebrations at Milngavie Town Hall last weekend, reflecting on the writer's wit and wonder, with literary dream team Dani Garivelli, Kirstin Innes, Heather Parry and Kirsty Logan. They've written new introductions to Agnes's first 4 books as part of Polygon's major reissue campaign, and they discussed Agnes's incredible work and words. I was also joined in conversation by Agnes's son, John Crosbie, and the awesome Sorcha Dallas, who is the custodian of the Alasdair Gray and Agnes Owens archives. Alasdair illustrated some of Agnes's books and is a name often connected to the writer, along with James Kelman, all 3 featured in the Lean Tales anthology, and the legendary Liz Lochhead. I've also always loved the quote from Ali Smith that revels in Agnes's deadpan gothic qualities. Oh yes, and then some. Later on, Dani, Kirsty, Kirstin and Heather will discuss Gentlemen of the West, Like Birds in the Wilderness, A Working Mother, and For the Love of Willie, all published in the 1980s and 90s. But first up, here's Sorcha and John.
I think you can give them a bigger welcome than that. Exactly. Look, we're here to talk about books, but don't be shy. And my goodness, there's so much to celebrate. Was that worth waiting for?
Yes,
Come on.
absolutely, yeah.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, awkward wait at the side. Definitely.
You guys wait there. It'll be awkward if you come on stage. That was probably equally awkward. But it was important, I think, that you got the righteous applause. And, feel free to cheer throughout, by the way. We're talking about books, but don't be shy. After we have spoken for maybe 20 minutes, 25 minutes or so about Agnes's incredible work and legacy, and also about archiving that and what that means, and also taking it forward, we're going to have a little break. Then we'll talk to the writers. And after that, I know that all of you involved would be more than happy to answer some questions, right? Yes. About writing, perhaps about yoga. We may or may not come to that, John Crosbie. For now, though, I'd love you to reflect a little bit on, not just obviously as Agnes Owens' son, but also as someone who has championed and loved her words and her writing and her books for so long, how it feels, and we'll get to the journey, but to be in this room with so many of us, there's this incredible exhibition next door. It's been a long time coming, and I just wondered how you're feeling about that.
Yeah, pretty emotional actually. It's quite overwhelming in a sense, but it's also very, very proud. And I think the families here, we're all very proud of my mother at this moment, and she hopefully this will remove the idea that Alasdair Gray, or the statement he made about her being the most neglected author in Scotland, and will remove that sort of image, because the crowd here today and the interest that's been shown and the positive feedback I'm getting from a lot of sources, it's just pretty overwhelming. So this is it's not something I do often, and sitting in front of a big crowd like this. But I'm proud to do so.
Yeah, and also I think the wonderful thing is we're very much here to discuss the books and the writing and the truth of that, as opposed to perhaps a lot of the preconceptions, John, that you must have been very familiar with over the years, because we have all these shorthands of who Agnes Owens was, and a lot of them just didn't come close to her talent or her storytelling, or probably her own character.
No, that's true, and I was thinking about this over the last couple of days, whereby there's a lot getting said even recently, and there's a lot of good stuff coming out from the introductions, from the archives, from various sources. But I must say, my mother, we were talking about it in the road over, me and my sister and my partner. My mother had a good sense of humour. She had a cutting wit. She was a happy person. She sang, she danced. She wasn't somebody who. She wasn't no pushover, if you like, but she always, I think, for a lot of years, had a kind of feeling of imposter syndrome in her writing. And it was probably later in her writing life that she did make the statement, I am a writer, with confidence.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's a Scottish thing, isn't it?
Yes,
and I think
absolutely.
it's probably a female thing to a great degree as well, or maybe all of us have it to some extent.
Absolutely, I know.
Yeah, in all aspects. Sorcha, maybe you can tell us a little bit about the way in which you work with the Alasdair Gray archive as custodian of that, which, I mean, was it 2020, I think? You first brought that incredible space to life, has, if you like, fed into the fact that we now have another space in the Whisky Bond, incidentally, in Glasgow. If you haven't been, you've got to go, not just for the Alasdair Gray archive now, but for this wonderful insight into Agnes Owens. But how did that come about?
Yeah, well, I guess my link to Agnes is through Alasdair. So I worked with Alasdair Gray since 2007, and guess was kind of largely responsible for the reimagining of the visual side of his quite expansive practice. So when he passed away in late 2019, I was sort of tasked by the family to kind of come in and think through legacy planning, and that was a month before the COVID pandemic hit. So, and for anyone who knows Alasdair Gray, you know, he always lived and worked within the domestic sphere, so his house was actually chock-a-block with books, artworks, preparatory material. It was quite a job to try and edit and make some sense of what we might take to the archive, and of course that is a collection that we've never owned. It's still owned by the family, so there was obviously a lot of kind of nuances and conversations around that and relationship building about how we start to think about a legacy, and I think it's really given me an insight into, you know, obviously legacies don't just happen, they have to be built and they have to be continually worked at, and I think John knows that too. You know, you have to keep making the case for why audiences can keep coming to Alasdair's work and to Agnes's too. And I think I was very much aware of that when he passed away, that was the time to keep the momentum, to keep him very much in the public consciousness. And so we got a little bit of support from the government to relocate the items, 5,000 items from the family home, which we installed to partly recreate his very ordinary domestic kind of working conditions. And I think what we've been trying to do since then is make the case for a kind of non-institutional model of archiving. How can you be a bit more responsive, a bit more experimental? How can you, of course, conserve and care for the material, but how can you use that as a catalyst to continually engage new audiences, whether it's from primary schools, secondary schools, community groups, or a lot of creatives who we've been working with over the last 6 years to come in and creatively respond and keep growing and making the collection generative. But during that time, I think I was aware, I knew Alasdair, worked with him closely, deep love for him and for the work and for his approach to making, but I was very aware that he was a deeply social maker, and a lot of what he was trying to do in his work was foreground often overlooked marginalised histories, and so that made me think, how can we move away from this idea of a standalone archive dedicated to one person and think about it more as a connective thread to a wider community. So that allowed me to think about reorganising the collection, and I think the distinction in what we're doing is that it's a curated collection, so I've proactively shaped it around trying to do that, trying to think about speculative archives and people who aren't represented elsewhere, and how can we have a duty of care to represent them within our collection. And so it felt very timely as we were doing that I was connected to John through Sarah Smith, who's here today, so thank you, Sarah.
Legend.
And really, it felt like John had been obviously representing the family, caring for the materials that he had sort of taken from Agnes's home or housed since she passed away, and was thinking about a more public setting in which that could be kind of shared. So I think John's relentlessness in trying to, and devotion and doggedness, which you have to be if you're, that's what like legacies and archives and estates need. They require to be continually kind of worked at with care and with diligence and with openness and collaboration at the heart of that too. So it felt like a real sort of alignment, and it has been a real gift and privilege to. I never met Agnes. I knew about her through Alasdair, who talked about her regularly, but I never met her. I'm sure it was probably at an event that she was at, but we never met. And for a lot of us who knew Alasdair, he was the connective. We were all orbiting around him. I've got to know a lot of other people who are orbiting Alasdair now that he's not there anymore, but sadly I never met Agnes. So it's been a real privilege to be tasked with caring for her archive and for the family to trust us to do that. And of course it's not, this is something that I'm not doing on my own. I'm doing it with Laura MacDonald, who's one of who's our CDA researcher, who's been doing some vital work on archiving, helping reorganise the material, and also doing some really critical interviews with John, with Peter Kravitz, who I think is here today, Agnes's former editor at Polygon, and other family members and friends. So there's a lot of vital work around that. We've got a team of volunteers, including Shona and Evie are here today, who helped the physical reorganising of the collection too. And I think we've also, this whole sort of celebration and centenary is a kind of combination of the archive, of the family, and of course Berlin, all coming together, and it shows that kind of power when you do all rally and collectively work together, what can be achieved. So we have for the last year been testing out opening up boxes of Agnes's material, getting people excited, and people are like, well, where can I buy this stuff? And now we can finally say here in the bookshop or online. So that has been the transformative thing, that people are now able to actually read and access.
Absolutely, because there were a lot of times that you would then come across Agnes Owens. Increasingly, she's been discussed as a huge literary influence. Damien Barr, Douglas Stewart, these people are saying this was the voice for me, and of course we will come to the writers involved in these introductions. But you mentioned that word collectivism quite a lot, and also this idea of connecting. And John, I wondered for you, obviously Sarah Smith is here, and you can maybe tell us a little bit about, obviously, not just being aware of your mother's books, but also, I don't know what happened. I have this vision of you just encountering this treasure trove of artefacts, and how that led you to, via Sarah, to the archive. How we came to be at this moment in many ways, because it took so much care and investment.
Yes. So my young sister Margaret had told me that we were out walking one day with mother, sister Catherine, and my partner, and she says, by the way, there's bags and bags of stuff up in the loft. And said, do you want? No, she actually had taken it down from the loft now, because Margaret's in what was my mother's house, and she had it lying there, and it was just a complete load of mixed bags and plastic bags. So I live in the Highlands, so I took it and said, I'll look through it. And she says, do you want this? I says, yeah. I knew there was value in it, not necessarily monetary value, but I knew there was value in this. And so I attempted over a few, maybe the best part of a year or so. But in tandem with that, there was a conversation cropped up with Sarah Smith through Twitter, of all things.
Used to be good.
Yes, and I can't remember the sort of starting point, but Sarah must have said to me, I think she'll correct me if I'm wrong, Sarah said, it'd be good to have a centenary, but there was a kind of discussion about Agnes Owens, and I said who it was. So this was a back and forth. So that was the sort of birth of that conversation. Then we met up, and we done a lot of groundwork then to try and see what the sort of lay of the land and who was interested, until we got on that journey to meet Sorcha, which was, Sorcha showed interest. I could see her, thinking the dials working right away, or the plan was going to come out pretty quick. And then it took off from there. But these bags, before I even got near Sorcha, I must say that I gave some of it to the National Library. It was just, and the trying, the sort of sorting it out that I attempted, I wasn't making much headway in that, and it was a case of doing it. I was still working at the time, and it was a case of doing it in my own time. But then I knew that there was lots of unpublished work there. There was poems, there was plays, there was correspondence with various writers, and I knew this was really interesting stuff for the world of literature. And my mother might have thought that's just to be discarded. I don't know. She wouldn't have thought that way. I'm not sure. But I just knew this had to be kept in the legacy. Then me and Sorcha had this conversation, and we had the conversation about what I would like to see happen, and the ethics of it, the ethics to match my mother's kind of being a mother who wrote when she could, and she didn't have any academic sort of learning about it, but she read that many books because she did read a lot of books. She was constantly getting the library, and she read that many books. She must have knew how to put a story together, and the influence of Alasdair Gray. So I knew that was something that was worth preserving, and also the project was to match this ethics of a writer, and the fact that there's writing classes going on just now with Kirstin. It's exactly the kind of thoughts and all that was in those early days to bring that forward.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. These the writing workshop with Kirstin Innes, that we'll maybe talk about that a little bit later, but the fact that there is always going to be an appetite for putting words on the page and telling stories. We're going to come to a couple of books a little bit later, John, in which you are, rumoured to be implicated, because of your own stories and experiences as a young man working on the building sites. One of the things that strikes me about that, which I think is really lovely, is the fact that, you're saying Agnes Owens, your mum obviously kept a lot, whether it was with any view to it being archived at some point or not. She didn't throw it out, right? So it's all there, it's in these bags. As an inveterate hoarder, right, this is me justifying everything. But at the same time, everything has a value. And so writing something down and telling stories was obviously hugely important to her. It strikes me that you telling stories was also very important to her, and her listening was very important.
Yes.
Were you conscious of that? Because the first couple of books we're going to speak about shortly really are in many ways embedded in a lot of the experiences you had as a young man.
Yes, I can look at The Gentleman of the West, and I've reread it a couple of times lately, and I can see the sort of ideas that maybe, because what was happening, I was probably a young apprentice, maybe at the end of my apprenticeship, and maybe even get into being a tradesman, so to speak. And I might have related stories as we do when we get together. And, I would have said these stories and thought that was quite a funny story. We all try and tell stories in the family. But I think she must have harboured these. She must have kept them to herself, because there was a gap, quite a gap before those stories were told, I would imagine. I couldn't even name this at a time, but it was probably my late teens. And then she said, I've wrote this book, and I can't remember exactly, but I recognised that I was, and she says, yes, some of the stuff you said is in it. But I wouldn't detract from the fact that she took these things and then fictionalised it into a narrative of these characters. But I do recognise some of the stuff in it, and I was quite, at the time, when the Gentleman of the West came out in 1984, I remember I was quite chuffed that this was kind of based on me, if you like, and my kind of narcissistic head at the time. And but as time went on, right enough, when I got older, I reflected on it more, and I've seen some reviews, and I recognised that this character was essentially me. This guy who drank a lot and was mixed with a bad crew, and it was all. He was a drunk in a sense, and he hung about with winos, but that was all kind of true back in the day. We wouldn't use these words about each other, but it was just a company that was kept. Yeah, so I could recognise the fact that, I could, if you gave me the book, I could tell you that was me, whatever. But there's other things in there that from our own input, our own creativity.
Absolutely.
It moves me. I would say just at this point, when Birds of the Wilderness came out, which was a continuation of the character Mac, I think that the first part of it, because I did go north and look for a life in the oil boom times and stuff, and I think that's just the first chapter, and then it's others that become the characters. So. Yeah, so I was less chuffed about that because it was less about me,
Moved on. Hold on a minute. What's happening to me now? Where am I in my life?
I think it was a different thing that kicked in from a different period.
Because it's exactly what you're saying. Yes, there are always flashes of something that might be in an experience that might be familiar to you, but that is not in any way to put some sort of template of autobiography onto this fiction, in any aspect. As if any of us were ever that clear-cut, if only, Sure. Sorcha, one of the wonderful things, I can see that we've got these books now that I'd love to just touch on, is the fact that, of course, the way in which the archive works is that it's just so much a sort of imaginative, creative, living archive, and so it's so much in conversation with other writers. We're going to come to these introductions, but also it's about the artwork. But tell us about the Joan Ardley, because again, what I love about that is they're so evocative, but also we've got this other incredible artist who was often, for various reasons, kind of marginalised or written in the margins rather than front and centre in Joan Ardley.
I can't take any credit for that. That was the team at Berlin who came up with selecting Joan Ardley with support from John, and such a kind of astute sort of selection.
Totally.
And like a woman who, again, very much forging her own kind of path, anti-establishment, doing things on her own term, also representing a lot of working class lives within Glasgow. So I think there's a real affinity with that. Alasdair, for a lot of people who've come to visit the Alasdair Gray archive and then have heard about Agnes Owens, it's often because of Alasdair's illustrations. So they've been fans of his work, and then they've seen these illustrations using his artwork, and that's how they've connected to Agnes. So of course there's a connective thread there, and we really want to continue to explore and develop that, and both collections reflect that. We've got correspondence between them, we've got edits that Alasdair's making to Agnes's work, and vice versa, so that is embedded within the archive itself. But I think there's something really nice about her standing on her own terms too, and that design concept using Joan's work, I think, really kind of does that. It brings it together as a cohesive set, because Alasdair only illustrated 3 of her covers, and also the collected Lean Tales, which was obviously with Alasdair and James Kelman too. So I think the overall aesthetic, and to be able to see in September all 7 of them together will be wonderful. I also don't want to put her on the spot, but I also love how Kirstin Innes has sort of themed her outfit today.
Yes,
based on the jacket.
Don't worry, Kirstin, you're getting full props for that shortly.
There's lots of opportunities for that as well. Yeah.
But it is, you can dig as deep as you like. Obviously, I love this idea of you picking up Gentlemen of the West for the first time and perhaps seeing, reflections of yourself as a younger man within it. But I wonder not just about the experience of reading your mum's books, John, but also what you were finding within these. You touched on poems and letters, and obviously that for those of us who love to revisit anyone's archive like that is fascinating, but for you that must have been like a revelation, because every single thing is precious, right? And maybe when she wasn't being as aware that perhaps something was going for publication, you get a little bit more insight as to someone, and that's important.
Yeah, the poems, I think she actually did herself through the encouragement of the National Library of Scotland, give them some poems, 4 poems, some years ago. But there's lots of poems, there's lots of poems. And the plays, they're quite fascinating. And one of them actually, because I have a sister, we have a sister in France who's lived there since the early 60s. My mother would visit there, and there's a play set in France, and there's different things. And there's a play in particular that I called The Troublemaker, which was based on the break-in shipyards in Fast Lane, and it's about the Ukrainian people who worked there and were treated quite dismissively. And I've read it, and I actually found through research the article that probably my mother read. I don't know why. I don't understand why it was interested of it. Well, the underdog probably was because it was the underdog, and it's about the Ukrainian union members who weren't treated equally because they were Ukrainian. And it's a play that I just think is quite of now. But there she wrote this, I don't know when. She did, I was looking at something the other day, and she seems to imply, and maybe some of the family know, I don't know, she seems to imply that she's been writing things for a lot of years. So she's been writing these things and not saying anything about them. Well, okay, I'll put it a different way, not to me. So when I see these things, I was quite, I said, wow, she's really tried a lot of things. And she sent things to the BBC. Some were picked up on, some weren't, and some rejections there, obviously. But there was interest shown by there's a Royal Lyceum Theatre in Edinburgh, says we would like to develop a play or two with you. So she had this interest that she just stayed in this world that she was in.
I think also it's even just having the conversations or asking the questions as to why these things don't necessarily happen. And Sorcha, in terms of an archive like this, it is as much about the kind of dialogue and the questions and the just going over and asking questions of the representations and reports of how someone wrote and lived. Because at the time we're seeing a lot of media representations which kind of perpetuated the same details over and over and over.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's part of the beauty of the different writers who've written the introductions to our text too, in terms of what they've picked up and responded to. There's a kind of continuity between them, but there's also nuances within it as well. But yeah, I think I feel like there's a connective thread to Agnes and a lot of kind of contemporary writing around motherhood, parenthood, maybe more generally. Definitely the kind of body horror, gothic, Scottish there's so much there, I think, to still explore. And that's, there's lots of work obviously still to do around that, this kind of more embedding this web around her with contemporary writers, but also looking kind of historically to other people who are writing at that time too. I mean, of course, she's spoken in the same terms as and same community as Alasdair Gray, as James Kelman, as Liz Lochhead, but I think there's wider mapping that could be done to her, not just within Scotland, but as John has spoken about before, she did read so avidly. She was really influenced by the American Southern Gothic too. There's connective webs beyond Scottish literature too that I think warrant further kind of investigation as well. So yeah, I mean, obviously from working with Alasdair's material for quite a while and it being limitless, the amount of stuff that you can do with it, and part of the challenge too, that there's never a boundary to it. I feel as much as Agnes's collection is more discrete, it's text-based, 700 items, there's still so much to still explore and develop from it as well. And one of the things that we're really excited about at the moment is that we do have Kirstin Innes and Heather Parry currently on residence with us, exploring both archives, and they'll both be writing new or creating new work inspired by what they've been uncovering. And it's such a privilege to have anyone come in and explore the collection, but to see people coming in week on week and going down rabbit holes and exploring and connecting, and also highlighting things that I've maybe not looked at for a while or haven't been as aware of is really exciting. So that's part of what I love about the job of being the custodian. I mean, don't get me wrong, running a archive beyond an institutional boundary is very risky and very precarious, and that's been bound into it from the start. But I think these things matter, and doing things differently and challenging certain ways of working that are more reflected of the ethics behind why people are writing, which is a big part of what we're trying to do, obviously, with Alasdair's material and now with Agnes's. So yeah, we're really proud that this is the first satellite archive, and we're hopeful that it will be the first of many, and that there's definitely other lives out there that needs highlighted, and new archives that need created to sort of do that.
It's a wonderful thing as well, where kind of the more voices you have reflecting on a particular writer, in this case Agnes Owens, and these incredible, I can't wait to read the other 3 introductions, but the 4th we've got, and they're all very different and they hone in on different themes, but there are these wonderful sort of recurring notions as well, and one of them is this idea of I guess perseverance and persistence. There's not necessarily resolution. These are not kind of like tied in a bow narratives, and do we really need any more of them? Did they really naturally exist anyway? But the idea that you found details of the fact that your mum, that Agnes Owens, was always writing, whether it was for the page or not, and irrespective of circumstances, some of which were unthinkable, she kept on writing. That was obviously something that was so important to her, to put something down on the page, to get up in the morning and to write.
Yeah, I mean, maybe what you're alluding to there, in a sense, was after the tragic circumstances about her son, Parry, our brother, there's this notion that it's not untrue that she her writing decreased. She went on there was a quietness about her writing. I say it in those words because my mother actually she was energised with the campaign against the justice system, which something she did. But I found so much evidence of her still working in the world of writing. She maybe not have been writing, but she was appearing still doing readings. She was on different venues throughout the country, UK wide, at this time when she seemingly wasn't doing much. And then obviously Liz Lochhead And I've wrote a play, Them Through the Wall, which was the Cumbernauld Theatre Company, which was, I assume that Liz contacted my mother and said, here's a project, and so she got on with that. And it was, of all things, it was a comedy. It was a farce, a deliberate farce. It wasn't successful, I don't think, because of various things that happened. One of the main players took unwell and didn't have a replacement, with things like that. But she wasn't, what I'm trying to say, she was stoic in her approach. She stood up. We as a family, I'll speak for myself, but I would imagine us as a family were inspired by her stoicness to keep going, to keep, not giving in to, massive tragic circumstances at that time, and in other times in her life. She had that sense, I think, to keep going.
I wonder what it's like for you reading these new introductions, if you go back into them and see like a different, because everyone has a slightly different perspective. It's like talking about someone and people see them in a slightly different light, but it's all still focused on this incredible woman in her books, and so you're getting a slightly new version of your mum every time.
I think that I've said it to the 4 writers. They're very much. I think they're really good, and it is a different insight, and I think they're on board with Agnes Owens. I think they're flying a flag for Agnes Owens. They're saying here's something that we've overlooked, and it's quite. To me, it makes me feel quite. She's heroic. She's heroic in her quiet ways and how she conducted herself. I mean, somebody asked me a thing and says, "Well, what would your mother say?" So I'm not asking questions on your behalf, but somebody would say, well, I think she would say, "What the hell are you playing at, John?" Well, this, because she wouldn't want too much. She wouldn't go that kind of look at me thing. But but when I see these introductions and the insight that each writer has put into it, I go, yes, that's right, that's true. That's exactly right, and it's flying the flag for her, and again bringing her to the fore as an independent force of literature historically in Scotland.
Oh, do you know, I absolutely love that. I love that she would be like, why are you making all this fuss? Because you deserve the fuss. That's why you absolutely deserve the fuss. But listen, thank you so much for listening. We'll be back in maybe like 15 minutes or something like that. You'll know, we'll let you know. But in the meantime, let's have a huge, huge cheer for Sorcha Dallas, wonderful John Crosbie, and Agnes Owens. Hi there, come on. That was quiet. Okay. Thank you, guys. My pleasure.
Ah, there you go. Agnes Owens' son and literary executor of her estate, John Crosbie, along with Sorcha Dallas, custodian of the Alasdair Gray and Agnes Owens archives. We had a coffee break after that and a wander around the terrific Out of the Margins exhibition in the adjoining Lily Art Gallery. That's part of the wider centenary programme that also includes a tea party, more exhibitions and creative writing workshops run by the glorious Kirstin Innes. The Lily exhibition showcases material from Agnes's archive, newly commissioned ceramic objects by Hayley Jane Dawson, and Joan Eardley artworks, all of which resonate with and spark off each other, and it is well worth a visit. That runs until the 18th of June. After that, it was back to more conversation with 4 of our most thrilling and engaging writers discussing their new introductions to Agnes's book reissues. Dani Garivelli on Gentlemen of the West, Kirsty Logan on Like Birds in the Wilderness, Kirstin Innes on A Working Mother, and Heather Parry on For the Love of Willie.
So give them a huge welcome again, because you know you can hear them. Dani Garivelli, cheering please by the way, Kirsty Logan, Kirstin Innes, and Heather Parry. Come on, Saturday. It's not play your cards right, but it's better than that because it's got books. We're going to chat for about 40 minutes or so, thereabouts. We'll see how it goes. And after that, we would love your questions. And if you've got them for John and Sorcha as well, then the more the merrier. I've not quite discussed what we're going to do about microphones for that, but do you know what? We'll play it by ear. It'll all be fine. Before we come to the books themselves, I would kind of love to just know a little bit about your own relationships with Agnes and her books. Now, Heather and Kirstin, obviously, you've been working within the archive in a sort of residential capacity as well. So I'm going to start with you guys. When did you, Kirstin, let's just go to you because you're right there and I've known you the longest. When did you first even encounter Agnes's writing work or even name?
When I was 19, it was the first time when I read Agnes's work. And it was Isabel Murray at Aberdeen University was leading a course on Scottish women writers, and she was very, very passionate about Agnes in particular, and I was studying that course, so yeah, it's yes, I have been reading her for more than half my life. Yes, yeah. The thing that struck me was, which John was saying about her in person as well, was the black brilliance of her wit, and how funny she is, even when things are dark, especially when things are really, really dark.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What about you, Heather?
Well, I think I'm very different to Kirstin in that I didn't grow up in Scotland. Mm-hmm. I moved to Scotland about 12 years ago, and kind of like semi by accident in a lot of ways. And I was quite ignorant, I would say, of like a lot of very big Scottish literature. And I think I came upon Agnes through Lean Tales, which I found in a charity shop one day. And I kind of, you know, she was the one I knew least, obviously, out of the three of them, and in fact, not at all. And you have this beautiful moment where you discover a writer for the first time, and you just kind of go, what is this?
Yeah.
Who is this? Who is this writer? And being someone who writes very kind of like physical work, often very dark work and very gothic work, it's so nice to meet someone on the page who is doing the same things that you're doing, but much better. And since then, it's just been a journey through her work and through the archive as well, and getting to kind of engage with her work for such a huge period of time as we both are. It's just like a huge gift for a writer.
Yeah, because every sentence you could live in pretty much forever, couldn't you? I mean, you can just delve into these words. Does that mirror any of your experience, Dani, of encountering her? I think Lean Tales for a lot of people was...
Yeah, well, I'm considerably older than Kirstin, so I did not encounter her at university. But one of the things that's quite interesting about university was I was there about 1985, so I mean, mean, technically I could have done, but everybody was talking about Alasdair Gray then. I went and interviewed Alasdair Gray for the student magazine, but I didn't encounter Agnes until much later, and then it was through Elaine Tales and Arabella is what I remember really the most, and The Lighthouse, and it wasn't really, and so I loved those, but as you say, the work's not that accessible, so it wasn't until I went to write a piece on the Alasdair Gray archive for a newspaper, and I mean the archive's just so enchanting, isn't it? But then I got to think about and know more about Agnes's work then, and then since then, obviously, I've been really enthralled by it.
Yeah, I love to use the word enthralled because, Kirsty, in part of your introduction, you talk about the ways in which fairy tales can be written or not, something you delve into very much in your own work as well. But what was the kind of the narrative arc, if you like, of you encountering Agnes's work and then ending up here and delving so deeply into her words?
Yeah, it's all very new to me. I think of all of us, I was the newest to Agnes's work. I'd never read her before, never was taught her at school or at uni. I have 2 English literature degrees, never came across her work. It was never given to me on a reading list, which seems wild now. It just didn't come up. And then I was aware of her work, but I'm really not a big realism gal in terms of what I read and how I like to exist in the world. Let's not look directly at reality. Best to just pretend it's not happening. So it all seemed to me to be real, like kitchen sink realism was what I assumed it was, naively. So I just didn't pick it up because I thought, that's not really what I choose to read. So then actually picking up this book, I was really blown away by how my misconceptions had made me miss out on this writer for so long. I hadn't really appreciated how surreal, how strange, how dark, and fairy tale-esque, but in the old sense of the word, not in a kind of cutesy happy ending way, but in a way of I think we can get into it, but this sense of the kind of old-fashioned sense of like fairies being these kind of dark, malevolent creatures. Like there's a lot of strange undercurrents in the stories. I just had massive misconceptions, and I'm glad that they have gone now.
Yeah, quite exactly. So many different ways to read them. So let's talk about these 4 books kind of by rote of publication date, because who necessarily knows exactly when perhaps they were written, if you like. Okay, but we're starting with Gentlemen of the West. 1984, Dani Garivelli has written the introduction, and we're going to hear a little bit of a reading from each of the books. But before we get to your reading, Dani, can you give us a sense of what particularly lured you into that? We've already heard a little bit from John Crosbie and the way in which he may or may not have indirectly influenced the key protagonist. What a tale it is.
It is. It's an amazing tale. It's wonderful, and it's narrated by Mac, who's a brickie, as John has already eloquently said. It's structured as a series of vignettes, so each chapter is kind of self-contained. It's like each one is an escapade or an encounter or an experience that Mac has had. What lured me in, partly the fact it's told from a male perspective, which is, I would say, quite unusual. And also, John has said that Agnes was not very confident, but I think it takes a degree of self-assurance to, that was a territory that was already being inhabited by a lot of male writers, Alasdair, James Kelman, William McIlvanney, and yet there's not a second that you read that the voice feels inauthentic, not 1 second. But I think probably in addition to her authenticity, because obviously she liked men, she knew men, she had sons, and but she was also able to step outside that and observe men. Yeah. So she was able to send them up in perhaps the way a male writer might not have done. So I really love that.
And she does.
And the humour, obviously, the humour is so deadpan, so sardonic, and it sort of undercuts what could be really bleak, but the humour brings a humanity to the whole, because there's no particular redemptive arc for the characters in Agnes's book. Yeah. But what you do get is this kind of sense of resilience and some hope within the confines of of a limited environment.
Her writing is so absolutely acute and spare. It's not sparse, but it's so powerful. So when we suggested that you maybe read a page or a page and a half from each of the books, how do you then choose that? And I just wonder if you could tell us why you've chosen what you did, and then maybe give us the reading if you fancy, Dani, as well.
Sure. So I chose the reading. So I'll tell you what the setup of it is. I chose a chapter where Mac has gone up country. He's gone out for a day trip away from town, and he's trying to bond with nature. He tries really hard, but with limited success. And along the way, he meets this German tourist. And this German he affects to find a bit of a pain. He doesn't want him hanging around, that's what he says. But actually what you realise is that he really craves this guy's company. And I just really liked the kind of poignancy, the gap between what he's telling us and what Agnes is revealing to us about what he really wants. And at the point where I'm about to read from, he's just bumped into this German tourist again in the pub. So do you just want me to...
Absolutely, go for it.
I became aware of a looming presence behind me and turned to encounter the gentle blue eyes of the big fella. "Could you tell me, please," he asked in the exact English of the educated foreigner, "how I ask for some beer and spirits?" "Sure, you just say a half and a half pint." "Thank you." He turned to the barman. "A half and a half pint." The barman was puzzled. "What's that?" "A half and a half pint," I explained. "That is what I say," said the big fella. "Aye, but it's not what you say, it's the way that you say it." "Beg pardon," his voice was uncomplaining. I sighed. I become bored when I have problems making myself understood. As if he knew what I was thinking, he said, "I hope you shall speak with me. All this day I have been alone, and now I think it would be pleasant to speak with someone." I looked steadily at my beer so he could not read the annoyance in my eyes. "Speak away, chum." "Chum?" he questioned. "Mate, then." "Mate?" I sighed. "Friend then, savvy friend." His big face creased into a beautiful big smile. "Friend, that is good. You will be my friend." I could see it was going to be hard to shake this guy off. Maybe he was a nutcase. It was hard to tell with foreigners. For them and us, there would always be something lost in translation. I looked him over. His gear was casual but expensive down to the open sandals. Leather, definitely not plastic. Probably a foreign hippie. One of the flower people, all loving marijuana. Though he looked familiar as if I'd met him before, but I wasn't happy with his company. He was not my style. He swallowed his whiskey with the ease of a professional drinker. Then I thought, maybe he wasn't so bad. "What's your name?" I asked. He understood this. "Max." He held out his hand. His grip was warm and firm. "Call me Mac. Everybody does," I told him with no hope of understanding. He laughed. "Mac and Max. It is the same. Perhaps we are the same."
Yeah, just a snippet there from Gentlemen of the West. Do you know, it's so lovely, this idea of is someone who we think they are or not, and I think that's a recurring theme in all of the books, and also how different are we, or how similar are we. One of the things that you reflect on in the introduction, you say that, Agnes Owens was caught at the intersection of three prejudices: class, sex, and age. That's a perfect storm in many ways, isn't it? Because there was so much conspiring not to have her stories told in her way.
Absolutely. I mean, I suppose that's a product of the time. There was that famous thing that Alasdair Gray she's supposed to have said, is it because old and ugly? And Alasdair said, yes, but it's not only that.
But, what consolation.
I guess the thing is that that's in effect, Agnes did not see herself as a feminist, but in effect what she's writing about is the structures that limit people, men and women, the patriarchy and how those affect, and obviously she was caught in that herself. It did affect the way she was judged, I think.
And her depictions of masculinity, which will maybe lead us on to Like Birds in the Wilderness, Kirsty, are fascinating as well, because it is coming from this very different, if you like, vantage point. But also at the time, we're maybe used to seeing one element of masculinity kind of depicted in literature and maybe on the building site, but we're not seeing the interior lives which she seems to dig so deep into. So you can maybe tell us about like Birds in the Wilderness, because it follows on, doesn't it? And it follows Mac to a point, as John Crosbie told us earlier. Give us a sense of what's happening in this.
Yeah, it's what I love about it, and I decided to read just from the beginning of the book, just to show how it kind of sets up this quest narrative, or like a fairy tale. It's a guy's seeking his fortune. But what I love about it is it does not give us the satisfaction of it actually being a quest, or it actually being like a fairy tale and things lining up and it having a neat little ending. It's like it sets something up for you and then weeks it away again, which is kind of the experience of the character as well. Is every time he's promised something, it doesn't come. He's promised a job, doesn't come. Promised money, doesn't come. Promised he's going to have happiness in this relationship, doesn't come. And I was so struck by the depiction of masculinity within that. And what I loved about it especially is how much is unsaid. I felt there's a real, very, very subtle sense that certain characters are implied to be gay, but it's very subtle. Like there's a moment where Mac and his kind of pal, workmate, they go on a night out and then they wake up the next morning and they appear to be in the same bed, but it's not commented on, like why are they in the same bed? It's not mentioned, it's not commented on. And there's a later point where they're arguing on the building site and the apprentice is saying, well, I see what you're doing in the toilets. And he says, what's he doing in the toilets? And he's like, well, nothing. And you're like, oh, okay. So it's so subtle, but I just feel it seems so true to masculinity, of just these things that everybody knows, but nobody says anything. Even if we might want to say something, even if we might want to admit to things, we mustn't say them.
Okay, well, we'd love to hear your reading.
Yeah.
With that in mind.
Yeah, I'm just going to read just from the very beginning. All day I had tramped the streets of this strange city in a fruitless search for work, head bent against the wind and lugging my shabby hold-all. Already my money was spent on scrappy meals and fags. The only thing I possessed to the good was an address for a lodging house obtained from the local Department of Health and Social Security. But since they were unwilling to advance me the rent, I had slight hope of being accepted. All the same, I decided to try it. I was cold, tired, and hungry. One night's kip was my present notion of paradise. I stopped a guy to ask the way. He told me to cut along Barrack Road, first on the left until I reached Hawker's Lane, second on my right, then to carry on until I reached the Cenotaph. He was still mouthing directions when I left him. Eventually I reached my goal, one of a row of faded Georgian terraces. A dour-faced youth answered the door. I explained that the brew had sent me. Brew? He questioned. Labour exchange, then. They said you took in lodgers. He jerked his head backwards to convey that I should follow him down a long lobby into a big kitchen that smelled of onions. Wait here till I fetch my da, he said. I sat at a big table covered with an oilcloth and faced a pot on the cooker. It was boiling over. I felt I should turn off the gas, or at least turn it down, but I was afraid that I might appear forward. I became agitated with the problem and had decided to creep away from it all when the youth returned with a stockily built man who said straight away, "It's £16 a week for your digs. Dani here will show you the layout and the rules. Take note that we don't put up with drinking in the rooms, women in the rooms, or any other kind of activity, apart from sleeping." £16 a week, I said thoughtfully. We're one of the cheapest places about here, but if you don't fancy it. Quickly I said, that's fine, but can you wait until Friday for the money since I've just newly started work? There was no point in telling him otherwise. I sensed he wasn't the type to take chances with an unemployed brickie. As long as you're working, you can pay £10 a week extra until you're clear. He passed me over to Dani, who gave me another jerk of the head. I followed him out of the kitchen. The pot was still boiling over.
Ah, there we go. I sense there. That's like Birds in the Wilderness.
Yeah.
And oh my goodness, I love that, nothing happening in the bedroom except sleeping, right? Nothing happening in the bathrooms. Very little happening. That's okay as well. That is a story in and of itself. And you see at one point in the introduction, the heart of this novel is its refusal to redeem. Almost pulling back from the necessity or the drive to resolve something feels like a bit of a sort of magical act as a fairy tale writer as you are in itself.
Yeah, I think that's what I was so struck with. We're all familiar with the mythic quest, we're familiar with the structure, the hero's journey. So, I start reading this and I'm like, cool, hero's journey, I know exactly what's going to happen in this story, brilliant. He started the book, he's down on his luck, he's got nothing, amazing, he's going to go on a quest, he's going to get everything that he wants. Nope. No. No, he's going to get it. He's going to get a little grasp on it, and then it's going to, bit like a bird, it's just going to go away out of his grasp again. And I love that refusal, that, no, I'm not going to give you the easy story, the easy answer. But I was very struck when reading kind of some of the coverage of Agnes Owens' life. There was this attempt to kind of force this fairy tale narrative, this, she was forgotten for so long and look, now she's back, or she was just an ordinary woman, an ordinary mother, and like now she's a success. And it's just not that simple. No. It's not that simple, and it's in her life and in her work, it's just this refusal to give us this easy answer, this easy story.
I mean, it is very much in that book. There's this sense of, some of us don't leave a trace, nothing happens, and that's okay. But it's a very difficult thing to kind of put down and say, you know what, get on with it.
But then there is a trace because she wrote about it.
Absolutely, that's it. Well, the interesting thing is, so we're kind of getting a handle on some of what's happening within Agnes Owens' writing. We're getting to know Mac, and I'm sorry for keeping looking at you, John Crosbie. I know it's a fictional character, but nonetheless. So we've got a handle on her, really exploring the interior lives of these men and these characters, and then we come to A Working Mother, which is 1994, Kirstin, and the publication dates don't necessarily reflect the time and place, of course, they're written. But you say in the introduction that, it was nonetheless, just as we're getting a handle on something, a departure of sorts. Something different happens with the narrator, for starters, in A Working Mother.
Yes, so for a start, the narrator is a woman in A Working Mother. And when I was sifting through the archive to try and find some information about how Agnes had felt about this, she seemed very surprised that people thought it was odd that she was now writing about a woman. She said, I've been known as a writer of men. I don't really understand why. Because she published lean tales in between this as well, where there's multiple viewpoints and point of view. But yes, the narrator is a woman, and Like Birds in the Wilderness and Gentlemen of the West are kind of interlinked short stories with the same kind of narrative thread, but A Working Mother is very much, it's a novel. It's been kind of had this word novella attached to it, which I think always people think means less than a novel, flimsy. It's just a short novel. It's longer than Orbital, that just won the Booker Prize a couple of years ago. It's longer than Muriel Sparks' A Crime of Miss Jane Brody. It's just a beautifully formed short novel. But it's a departure from what she was known for at that point. Yeah.
Would you like to hear? Would you like to read us? I think you're going to fire in with the beginning, which is.
I'm going to start right at the start because I think it's such a good. Everything is set up in this page and a half. You will know everything about this character that you need to in this page and a half. I'll have to get a job, I said. My husband replied. To get away from me, I suppose. We owe money. The kids need clothes, apart from the fact that we like to eat. Do what you like. I'm tired of carrying it all. You are tired of carrying yourself. He nodded. 10 years after the war, he still looked as if he'd just come home from the battlefield. Flags and bunting had hung from the windows in our street. I'd helped to paste the letters reading, "Welcome home, Adam," and immediately fell in love with his handsome, suffering face when he passed by our window. A fine lad, my dad had said. He looks, my mother broke off. Looks what? Unreliable. I wanted to run out and touch him. Come back from the window, girl, said my father. Then he ran up the street and shook his hand. The same evening he returned from the pub, accompanied by Adam. Both were drunk, but drunk or sober, I loved this war hero. Now I wanted to escape from him. I think I will go into the city for work, I said. I should get something with no bother, I can type. You're bound to be a success in an office with your laddered stockings and black fingernails. It's only coal, I explained. I can be smart when I want to. Let's celebrate your new job. I emptied my purse and discovered I had enough for a bottle of the sweet, sickly but lovely South African wine.
Oh, there you go. The opening page and a half from Incredible Working Mother. Kirstin, you touched on the novella idea, and I think there is something to be said for this idea of taking up space, right, in a bookshop and in a bookcase, and the fact that it's incredible to actually see all of these in print at the same time, again, with these new introductions, because so often that idea of just something being slim means it is somewhere, and you reflect on this in the introduction, you know, that it's lightweight, that it's flimsy, that in actual fact, doesn't it carry more weight because every word has been laboured over so much?
Every word that Agnes Owens writes is perfectly placed within where it's supposed to be. I mean, you can tell there, that was just a page and a half, and that sets you up perfectly.
Yeah.
You have such an idea of that character, of her situation, of the action, everything set up. One of the things that I really noticed rereading this to write this introduction is how quickly she moves us around. She is not interested in waste. We move between the pub, the house, and the office, basically, where Betty, our lead character, gets a job, and then also out to her boss's house at one point. And we move with perfect economy. Agnes hits return on the typewriter and we have moved to space. Agnes hits return, we have moved another place. And the writer has to jump to catch up at first, the reader has to jump to catch up. But then we begin to get into the rhythm. It's short because she's not faffing about.
Do you know, there's something that strikes me about what you've just said. Okay, the reader does keep up. And in actual fact, she trusted her readers, and the readers trusted her perhaps more than the media in many ways. You know, like seriously, there was an absolute kind of confidence in her writing that we would get it, that we were here with her, irrespective of these kind of strange origin stories and kind of headlines and shorthands that weren't giving her a fully formed writer's life. She knew that the reader would be there.
Well, she was a reader. I mean, John touched on this earlier, but she was always reading. I think it was you, John, that said, I can't remember where in the archive I've read this, that you never actually quite were sure what she was reading, because she just always had a library book on the go, and then she'd take it back to the library and get the next one out. In the archive, I found a sheet that she's typed up. One of the amazing things about what Agnes has done for her own posterity without thinking it is that when she wanted to practice for an interview, she got her typewriter out and she typed potential answers to questions. Instead of handwriting it or just making notes, the typewriter was very much her instrument for kind of tuning this. And so there's, in the Working Mother box in the archive, there's 4 different, I suppose you want to know why it was I came to write a working mother. And she's given 4 different answers. I'm not sure which one she went with in the end, and all of them are true, none of them. One of the really interesting things that I've kind of uncovered, in all of them, she does say that she had written this a long time ago. This book was, I think, reading about, very much the narrative around Agnes that had been allowed to sort of perpetuate, maybe because the media liked to latch onto it, was, she never wrote a word until she was 58, and she decided to get out of the house to go to a creative writing class in Alexandria, and there she was discovered by Liz Lochhead and James Kelman and Alasdair Gray. And the fact was, she was writing from a much younger age than that. She had a short story published in The Scotsman when she was in her 30s. This book, I think, reads very much more like a book written by women of her age who were writing much earlier. You can see Flannery O'Connor, who she was a massive fan of, in a lot of her really dark short fiction. But you can also see there's a bit of Muriel Spark and Jessie Kesson in this. It reads like it's a post-war book. It's set 10 years after the war, and it's not a historical novel. And I think this feels like the one that was written first. And she said she'd obviously, the death of her son had affected her very badly, and she said she wasn't able to write. I found all this in the archive. She's a dream. Heather and I were reflecting, actually. We were like, why are we not keeping notes of our lives? What's it going to be, just like screenshots of text messages? And she said that she just felt like she couldn't write. She was scratching some things down, and then she found this box of this book that she'd written years before, literally fell out of a cupboard, and she picked it up and she said, I thought that was much better than what I was doing at the time, so I became a working mother.
Wow, so that's when it is. You know, I love the idea within that little introduction, you know, he looks unreliable. And throughout this, the kind of notion of is anyone who we know or think they are, or we who we think we are, the unreliable narrator. Of course, Betty herself, even on the back cover, you know, is referred to as such. That's something that she seems to have great playfulness with in all of her books, Kirstin, and certainly in A Working Mother.
In A Working Mother and For the Love of Willie. It's a funny thing because Betty's such a great character. She's funny and feisty and she's trapped, and we want to sympathise with her and we want her to get out. And again, just like Kirsty was saying, that story is not going to go how you think it's going to go. And we want to sympathise with her, and then suddenly she tells us, the reader, a completely different story from what we just see her telling her colleague. There's no explanation for the lie, and then we get the idea that she's maybe making up quite a lot of stuff for the love of the drama. Agnes is very, very harsh on Betty. It's interesting to be harsh on a first-person narrator, and it's a really interesting turn of the screw where you get to with this book.
Absolutely. And as Kirstin, as you touched on there, that idea of the kind of unreliable narrator, but also the ambiguity of it is something that is absolutely relished, Heather, isn't it? And For the Love of Willie. So tell us a little bit about this, where we find the characters, and because again, Kirstin's saying, you know, she presses return, she takes you somewhere else. There's time travel and there's lots of different variations of the same character within this.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm sure we would all say this, but this really is my favourite of Agnes's books. So it's a real joy to be able to dig into it and kind of interrogate it. But weirdly, there's a thing that happens when you're a novelist, which is you're writing in the early days kind of thinking that you probably won't ever be read by anyone, so you're kind of writing for like an imagined audience or for yourself. And then when you get published, something changes and you become much more nervous because everything you write becomes a potential book. So then you're imagining the reader and the way that they're going to compare it to your other books and how they're going to say, oh, she's lost it. You know, this one was really dull. Or she had so much promise and then she just spaffed it all away. But this doesn't happen in For the Love of Willie. In fact, she feels so confident in this book. And she's so kind of like playful, really more playful than usual with her prose. So the actual beginning is 2 patients sit on the veranda of a cottage hospital run by a local authority for females with mental problems, some of them long-term and incurable. And I love that, because it can be the mental problems that are incurable, or it can be that they're incurably female, which actually turns out to be an incredible indication for what the real story of the book is about. And I don't think it's an accident that the main character in this book is a writer as well. And she is trying to tell her story kind of within this institution, and within various different challenges that are contriving to stop her telling her story. But in the telling of the story, she affects everybody else within the institution and the people that work there and things that are going on outside of it as well. And what I love about that is that, you know, given the state of the world currently, I think a lot of us are trying to think about how you write truly kind of revolutionary or inspiring political books. And I would imagine that Agnes really did not consider herself to be a political writer, but there's politics shot through this book completely. And it's actually so hard to write a book that inspires people towards change, because you end up just being preachy about the state of the world or annoying. And you end up with like horribly moralistic narratives and characters that you don't want to be in the same room as. But Agnes has written a story that really is actually inspiring, full of characters who are really, really flawed, but have value in themselves and like draw value out of each other, even as they're kind of slagging each other off.
Yeah, quite.
Which they do a lot.
Again, this just comes back to the trust and the faith that she had in the reader, because you mentioned in your introduction, you know, in the ways in which it's kind of quietly revolutionary, and it really kind of like, it has certain assumptions and plays with certain assumptions that she trusts the reader will have, but then is manipulative enough in a brilliant way to undercut those expectations, right? That's genius.
Completely, like, pulls the rug out from under you. You know, in this really, really, truly shocking way. I mean, like, I'm a person who thinks a lot about what you can get away with on the page. I am not easily shocked. Like, I have read a lot of very horrible books. I remember reading a Marquis de Sade book on a bus and just thinking, please stop doing that to each other. I have had enough. I've read a lot. And the turning point.
Horrible. You know what I was going to say.
But still, I got to the reveal in For the Love of Willie, and you're like jolted out of it, and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe that's what's happening. And I think it is so impactful because there is so much dark humour in this book, and she refuses to remove the humour from a story that has this like real horrible turn. But she also refuses to turn away from the reality that like inspires these kind of stories. So it hits you so much more than it would do if it was kind of completely unreal.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see you've got a page turned over. Controversial. Could be a bookmark, could be a page turner. I'm not judging. But if you'd like to read us a little bit more, those opening sentences were great. But yeah, just to get a sense of For the Love of Willie.
Yeah, so I'm going to read actually from the middle, which is probably a horrible faux pas. And so we've got Peggy, who is the one who's trying to write her story in this institution for incurable females. And she has a roommate and a friend called the Duchess, who's a bit older than her, and perhaps not quite as with it as she used to be. And she loves reading romance novels. And as Peggy is actually managing to write down the story of her teenager years and what happened to her, it's kind of invoking this spirit of revolution in the rest of the women in the institution. And I do want to say, we've got toddlers in the room. I am going to swear, so apologies, but you'll
We've
have
got
to take
clearance for the swear.
Take it with Agnes. An incident took place in the ward that jolted the patients out of their usual apathy, even those who were practically comatose. For no apparent reason, a normally unobtrusive patient had thrust a fork into the chest of a nurse during breakfast. Luckily, the fork was of the cheap variety and did not much penetrate the skin, but it was enough to create a state of high tension in the rest of the staff. 5 gathered round the erring patient and whisked her so fast from the ward, her feet scarcely touched the ground. To think I've wanted to do something like that for years, said Peggy, doing a few steps of the Highland fling. Better watch or they'll have you off too, said the Duchess. I'm sure I wouldn't mind. These jags they give you are as good as a stiff drink. They put you out like a light, and that's something I could be doing with nowadays. Even a couple of sleeping pills would be better than nothing. I thought you stopped taking them because you wanted to write. I'm fed up trying to write, said Peggy. I can't get peace for people screaming and groaning. If it's not that they're snoring like troopers, you included. Anyway, I've no paper left. I don't snore, said the Duchess. Peggy laughed. You snore worse than anybody. You snore so loud you're waking yourself up. You snore like an elephant, said the old woman, determined not to be outdone. Peggy shook her head, exasperated. The point I'm trying to make is if I don't get any peace to write and have no paper, I might as well get doped up as the same as everybody else. Understand? I don't understand, said the Duchess. Everything you say is so totally absurd. I think you talk like that for spite. Then she began to chew on her lips and roll her eyes around her head like a frightened horse, which Peggy took to be a bad sign. Take it easy, she said. The nurse will be along in a minute and you'll soon get your pills. I'm not bothered about that, snapped the Duchess. What I want to know is where is my true romance? I told you before, I chucked it out. Anyway, you don't want to read stuff like that at your age. You want to read something sensible. Without warning, the old woman reached out and fastened her long bony fingers around Peggy's throat. Cunt, she screamed. I'm going to kill you. A nurse rushed up and loosened her fingers by giving her what looked like a karate chop on the wrists. Is there something in here that's catching? She said.
There you go. A little sense of For the Love of Willie. And I feel like, honestly, where is my true romance? I chucked it out. Like, I feel like that's Agnes Owens' modus operandi right there. And I think we should finish this bit with Agnes Owens having the last word. So we will now have a little rest. And if you guys would like to ask any questions, get them ready. In the meantime, Dani Garivelli, Kirsty Logan, Kirstin Innes, Heather Parry. Let's have a cheer. Agnes Owens. And I think we've still got Sorcha and lovely John as well. So does anyone have any questions? Put your hand up if you do. And would you like can I bring a mic? I'm getting a no for the microphone. But you can project. I've heard you project well.
I was wondering for Heather and Kirstin, given that you're working within the archive, how have you found Agnes Owens' work influencing your own?
I have for sure. I think Kirstin has as well, but thinking very different. What's been interesting is the very different approaches we've taken to the residency. I guess because you bring so much of yourself to it as well. But yeah, I think I'm really trying to get the spirit of Agnes. Because we're writing across both Agnes Owens' archive and the Alasdair Gray archive, which are two, they're two very different writers and they're two very different personalities and they have very different interests and very different histories and biographies. So it's interesting to see where they intersect with our work as well. But I'm trying to take that kind of revolutionary spirit that's in For the Love of Willie and trying to do it in a way that's not completely contrived, in a way that, that it might come out this way in the context of now. And to talk about like the characters who are in the margins and what their real experience is and what their real voices would really sound like, and how to take the real injustices of the world and the systems that produce them and shine a light on them in a way that is completely like fresh, which is quite a challenge. And maybe I won't achieve it, but I will try.
I kind of feel like that's what I'm trying to do. As Heather said, we're writing inspired by the Alasdair Gray and the Agnes Owens archive, and I seem to be coming up with an idea for a fourth novel that is a kind of unholy mixture of both of them. Again, it's thinking about what Agnes did. She looked at the people who were most oppressed. I keep coming back to the children in the lighthouse. There's always sympathy. There's always even, the teenage son in her short story When Shanklin Comes and people like that. She's got sympathy for everybody. She finds the sympathy. And it's not sympathy actually, it's empathy. It's not, she's very much on the same level with these characters, with her people. She is not, sympathy would sort of presume a pity, it presumes a looking down. Agnes meets each person exactly on their own level and trying to take that through. And again, using that to address systematic injustice in a way. Yeah.
I'm interested in the way in which it might be impacting on both of your work as well, Dani and Kirsty. But before that, it's interesting, that idea of empathy. Forgive me if I'm misremembering which introduction it's in, but I think it's in yours, Dani, and I think again it's an Alasdair Gray quote, and at the end of it, in which he says, it could only have been written by a mother. And it's because of the empathy that is shown even when she's kind of depicting other characters. And is it in your introduction?
It is in mine, but it's in mine because I disagree with it.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. It's saying, wait a minute, this isn't because she's coming from the perspective of a mother. It's exactly what Kirstin's saying. It's saying, no, she meets everyone on their level. And so you kind of squirm slightly at the fact that that's just because she's a mother, so she's empathetic, and you're saying, wait a minute, she had that empathy and met everyone.
Could have been for any
Absolutely, yeah. That seems really important as well, because that's throughout all of the books, no matter how much she's sending people up.
Yeah, and they don't have to be, as other people have alluded to, they don't have to be good people and good people like that. Yeah. They're all flawed, and she said she liked to write about people who were sinners with a little bit of good, but she will always see that little bit of good, and she'll be able to draw that out in her books. Yeah,
quite. But just with reference to maybe what you're writing, or it's interesting, you're saying it's almost as much as of how you look at something as it is how you're writing it on the page, and has that impacted on, just even taking that kind of, when we see things slightly differently or through a different writer's lens, it can just shift the way everything looks a little bit.
Well, I mean, I'm not a novelist, so it's different for me, but I would say the thing that's influenced me most is the concision and thinking about how you can pair. I mean, I'm a big fan of restraint generally, but like just thinking all the time how you can pare the writing back and not put extraneous information or extraneous emotion, and just the restraint. That's the big thing that in my writing I would take from it.
Yeah, it's funny. I actually think I've become meaner since becoming a mother. You're so
I don't have time for this anymore.
Kind of, because you give so much of your empathy and patience and time to your kid, that when someone else that you don't really know, that's not really your responsibility, I'm just like, nope, that's not my problem, not my problem anymore. So I think I'm like worse, actually.
Totally.
But yeah, I totally agree with you, Dani, but it's the concision. Like, I predominantly am a novelist, but right now I'm working on script work, film and TV work, and on reading this, I immediately went to the script that I'm writing and was just like, rip. I don't need half this dialogue, don't need half of these scenes, because just, like the beginnings that Kirstin and I read, they're so similar. They're sort of this quest setup, or this like fairy tale setup. Someone's like off to seek their fortune, and it just tells you so much in such a short space of time that it immediately made me think, why am I yapping so much? Just shut up. Just show the thing. Show it simply. Show it cleanly. So it made me sort of go and rip a lot of stuff out, and it's made me think a lot about masculinity. We touched on this before, and like as the mother of a boy as well, like who is being raised by two mothers as well, it's made me think. I'm already thinking quite a lot about masculinity. What does masculinity mean in this day and age? What is a good man? How do we raise a good man? Is it possible to raise a good man? Is it our responsibility to make a good man? And this made me think so much about masculinity and the problems that we all have as humans of any gender, but specifically the weight that is put on men and the expectations that are put on men. And that has also affected my work quite a lot, in that the script that I was writing has a teenage female protagonist, but I've really amped up the father character now, which was not really the case before. He was just kind of a symbol more than like a character, but he's very much got his own story now, and it's a lot about his own kind of physical frailty and how he tries to kind of soldier on and be strong despite the fact that his body is crumbling, which is not a kind of obvious rip from this, but I think it's very much influenced my way of thinking about it.
And I mean, that's fascinating, because these are the immediate reflections on how it's impacting. You can't always necessarily tell. It maybe takes a longer time. These things have a longer tail sometimes. Are there any more questions? And then I think there's going to be book signings. And
a question for John, actually. So I just wondered to what extent reading your mum's writing has changed your perception of her as a person?
Nothing's changed any perception of her as a person. I think it's improved my perception of her. I mean, in the Gentleman of the West, for example, the Mac character, if that was me saying to my mother, "Get the tea on," like Mac says to his mother, that was never the case. The thing that what I'm saying is, my mother wouldn't have that kind of cheek, but she would always be there for you, and even during her writing, she was always there for us. She was never a cuddly mother. She was never somebody who would give you some wise words. She would like say nothing, like go on with yourself. But that was the kind of way she was. She sustained and maintained that through all her writing.
Thank you.
I love that. Okay, I think we should probably just about march on. If there's one more question, we could probably manage it. Yeah, there's a hand. There's a hand here from Rog.
Hiya.
Hiya.
For anybody, but it's following up on something that Kirstin said earlier on. I'm interested in these ways that just simply by repeating the same few reductive details about any writer's life, that these things can kind of calcify, and even if you're well-meaning, that can still have a negative impact, even if you're like republishing the work and re-talking about it. I'm thinking of what Kirstin had to say about the once upon a time, she went to a creative writing class and then was discovered by these men, etc., etc.
Yeah, so
the question is, have any of you discovered anything about the writer or the work that's new to us that can help give us a more expanded sense of the person or the writer, that's something that's just not in that shorthand of the way that Agnes Owens' work has often been understood?
Well, for me, it's just that she really resisted all of that, actually, which is interesting in the context of publishing in 2026, when everything is about kind of creating a very neat writer narrative as a way to get into the newspapers to then possibly sell your book. And I'm sure Kirstin's seen this as well. In her archive, there are so many letters she wrote to people who would read her work and then write from overseas, or people who interviewed her. There's a great Jane Grey interview that's quoted in the exhibition as well. And she just won't get on with it. She will just say no, or she will really push back on this idea of herself as this poor woman, or defined by the things that happened to her, or writing in a particular way. This idea of refusing to be a writer of men, because she'd only written 2 books by that point. She'd written so many different perspectives already, and that's very inspiring to me. And I hope it comes with age. I can feel it coming with age already. Where you're just like, no, actually, and if it makes someone uncomfortable, that's kind of their problem to sit with it. The problem isn't you standing up, it's what they're trying to impose on you, I think.
She says this, that Chitra Ramaswamy, who has also done some residency time, and Chitra actually had interviewed Agnes a few years before her death, and then wrote her obituary in The Scotsman. And she says that Agnes, she remembers going to visit Agnes in her house in Balloch. And she says this in the obituary, and she says, she told me not to mention the daffodils outside her house. She says, everybody's always going on about my daffodils. They always say, oh my goodness, her house was so small in a council estate and it was terrible, and she had these beautiful daffodils. And was that a representation of her inner creative life? And she was sick of it. And I thought that pretty much sums it up, actually, just this continual, a bit of bafflement actually at the way that this sort of entrapped narrative had kind of risen up around her. It just seems to have been there quite a lot.
I suppose because of the narrative, I came to the work with some expectations of what it would be like, and expecting to find more of Alasdair Gray or James Kelman in it. And I think what really surprised me was that those are not the influences that you can detect, and it is Flannery O'Connor, as you said, and it's John Steinbeck. In fact, Gentleman of the West is it was John that first pointed that out to me, that it's actually got quite a lot. It obviously draws some influence from Cannery Row. And when you go back to, I bought, after John said that, I bought Cannery Row and read it, and there's no doubt that she was reading Steinbeck, and so the influences are so different to what that narrative was suggesting, that it was all almost that she was riding on the coattails of those other writers.
Yeah, it's interesting to reflect on. Actually, it's a really good question. I can't speak for anyone else, but I'm going to go out on a limb and assume, we're all women writing in Scotland, and we have been asked variations on the question of how do you identify yourself as a Scottish writer? How do you identify yourself as a female writer? What does it mean to write about Scotland? What does it mean to write about a female experience? And I always think, well, how am I going to write otherwise? How am I going to write not from my experience in my life? And I think reading these books, it really expands what a Scottish book is, or like what a woman's book is, and how, yes, these things can be true. It can be true that she, first published when she was this age, and this is how she got into it. Those things can be true, but that is never the limit of what a writer is or what their work is.
Okay, well, on that note, we'll have one more question. The Shepherd's Crook has not arrived, and we love your questions.
I'm actually stunned, by the way. Just a wee bit, that gentleman asked there a minute ago, was there anything that maybe has not been said about it, that maybe it should be said? And one of the things that the main thing she was famous for was her writing. There's no doubt about that, how brilliant it was. She was also very keen on singing, but the only time we ever really heard her singing is when Callum's mum would invite us down New Year. Irene would organise parties and things like that, and it always involved singing. You always had to sing whether you wanted to or not. And so my mother was one of these ones, she wanted to sing, but she wasn't confident about her singing. And the only song that we ever heard her singing was a song called See What the Boys in the Back Room Will Have. And a wee bit of it goes something like this. We'll see what the boys in the back room will have. Until then I'm having the same. We'll see what the boys in the back room will have. Until then I died. Until then I cried. Until then I lied for the same. And she was finished off with a flourish.
That is wonderful. Oh, thank you so much. What a vision. What a song. I don't think we can better that. I think we just have to say a huge thank you to all of you for coming, to Sorcha, to John, to your good self with that memory of your mum singing, how absolutely wonderful. Dani, Kirsty, Kirstin, Heather, and thank you guys as well. Thanks so much for coming. We're going to be signing books. Well, I'm not. Come get a book signed. I might sign them anyway. Okay. Okay, thank you. Oh, that was brilliant. Oh, my pleasure. I know, right?
Huge thanks again to the excellent Dani Garivelli, Kirsty Logan, Kirstin Innes and Heather Parry, chatting live at Milngavie Town Hall. Thank you to the venue for being so welcoming, and thanks loads to you if you came along. Before that conversation, you heard the wonderful John Crosbie, Agnes's son, and Sorcha Dallas, custodian of the Alasdair Gray and Agnes Owens archives. Those Agnes Owens reissues are out now via Polygon, with another 3 titles being published in September. It's also worth picking up a fantastic new publication, Rich Things, which is Chitra Ramaswamy's creative response to an Alasdair Gray archive commission, and our vital, insightful and beautiful micro-essays are accompanied by photographic responses by Matthew Arthur Williams and marginal notes by Sorcha Dallas. Agnes Owens, spoiler alert, makes an appearance. All 3 are former A Kick Up the Arts guests and will hopefully get together to record a Rich Things podcast soon. The Out of the Margins exhibition runs at Milngavie's Lily Art Gallery. It's till June the 18th, really is well worth a visit, as are the Agnes Owens and Alasdair Gray archives in Glasgow. You can find booking details online. There's lots more chat about and from the Alasdair Gray archive on earlier episodes of A Kick Up the Arts, with guests including comedian Josie Long, novelist and screenwriter Rachel Atala, and writer and performer Alan Bissett. There's also an episode with the absolute wonder that is Liz Lochhead in cahoots with her official saxophonist. We all need one of them, don't we? Steve Ketley. And we reflect more on ideas of living archives on an episode celebrating the Scottish Ghanaian poet, artist and photographer Maud Salter. If you fancy hearing more conversations like this live, I'm with Nicola Sturgeon at Erskine Arts on August the 2nd, with female and non-binary music collective Hen Hoose at Edinburgh's Queen's Hall on May the 28th, and with novelist J.D. Kirk at the launch of this year's Bloody Scotland Crime Writing Festival. That's at Stirling's Golden Lion on my doorstep on June the 4th. And there are lots more events as well. I'm going to update my website. I'll stick them all there, akickupthearts.org. It would be lovely to see you somewhere. For now though, please share this podcast, subscribe, come and find me on social media, get in touch, and thank you, as always, for listening. Bye for now.